engaged in working with groups of girls and young women in Canada. So I'm not going to talk about Canada, but also in South Africa, in various sites in South Africa, in 3 provinces. And the project aimed to understand from the perspectives of the girls and young women what gender-based violence, in particular sexual violence, looks like. We also wanted to understand what change they might envision. Informed by their understanding, we wanted to then engage stakeholders and community members to, 1, listen to the voices of girls, and together with the girls and ourselves, develop or imagine change, context-relevant change in the community. Just briefly, since 2016, we've been holding with the girls a series of participatory visual methods with the girls, sometimes lasting for a whole week during the school holidays, but often on weekends and an odd day here and there. And these have involved drama, which was the girls' favorite medium, photo, voice, and drawing, participatory community mapping, digital storytelling, and self-film making using their cell phones or cell phones that we brought, or small tablets. I don't really want to talk about the findings today, but just to give you an overview of what we found. We found, not surprisingly, unequal gender norms in these communities, which then produce gender-based violence, particularly sexual violence, also poverty and crime. And I'm going to come back to the findings later on. We also found that there tends to be silence around sexual and reproductive health issues. Very little open discussion on sex and sexuality, particularly with girls and young women in the community. Schools also are not doing enough to educate around sexual and reproductive health. When they do, their approaches are largely biological and moralistic, and thereby putting stigma and shame, particularly for the girl, around sexual and reproductive health. These produce or tend to lead to negative outcomes for girls and young women in particular, including gender-based violence, including unplanned and unwanted pregnancy. But one of the surprising findings, at least for South Africa, was that we found in this one site at least, high rates of early and forced marriage, which the girls then wanted to focus their attention on addressing in this particular community. Obviously, unplanned, unwanted pregnancies, early marriages, gender-based violence will also lead to poor health outcomes for these girls. STIs, including HIV, was very high in the minds of the girls and in their experiences. Poor educational outcomes, including failure or grade repetition, and ultimately dropout from school. And this again continues the cycle of poverty and inequality and gender-based violence, and it goes on and on. So that's an overview of what we found or what we are finding in these rural communities. So what we have learned from engaging with the girls using participatory visual methods is can be categorized into three areas. The first is unearthing the voices of those most impacted by the violence, in this case, girls and young women, using PVM, enhanced our understandings of the issues peculiar to their context. So as I said, in one community, it was early and forced marriages. In another community, it was violent sexual assaults, rapes. In another community, it was something else. So the methods allowed us to have a nuanced understanding of the contextual issues that face girls. The second area that we gleaned from our work in Networks for Change is that the visual artifacts that the girls produced from their PVM work became useful tools for engaging the community, their parents, as well as other community members, but also community level decision makers and provincial policy makers. We took these into our meetings with them. The third area is that this community involvement, engagement that involved ourselves, the community members, the community decision makers, as well as the girls in some cases, allowed us to develop contextually relevant and targeted interventions. So in this one community where early and forced marriages were identified as a key issue facing most of the girls, we were able to, with the community and the girls, to develop a community protocol for addressing early and forced marriage, which the chief of the nation signed just before lockdown in March, and we had meant for 2020 to be the year in which we implement the protocol and see if it works, so that we can adjust it and maybe implement it in other communities. The good thing is that the protocol has been taken to other to policymakers in the province, who are very keen to see it being implemented. So the question is then, in the context of the pandemic, how can we or should we continue to work with the girls and the community to confront gender inequality and gender-based violence and facilitate change? For example, in this community, how can we continue the work that we have started and use the protocol to monitor or to implement to see that girls are safe from being forced and abducted into marriages? We know from international research, although it's limited, that COVID has exposed and indeed worsened gender inequality in many communities. So child marriage is on the increase, even though in South Africa we don't really have empirical research to see whether indeed it has increased. We also don't have empirical research yet to see whether adolescent or unwanted and unplanned adolescent pregnancies have increased. But research from elsewhere suggests that it has. And many of these impacts are negatively skewed against girls. So in addition to losing their access to schooling, at least early on in the lockdown, they also lost access to health services. At a time when we were beginning to see a lot of hype about adolescent-friendly health services in many communities. And as I said, the cycle of poverty and food insecurity has also been been seen in many of these the communities that we work with. So Save the Children says to us, if we don't get it right now during the pandemic, the plight of the girls in many communities, and particularly in these poorly resourced communities, will be determined by how and what we do now during the pandemic. Just to reiterate the gendered negative impacts of COVID during this time: increased unemployment, increase in gender-based violence. For example, in South Africa, just after lockdown, between March 27th and 11th of April, more than 7,000 calls were made to the national hotline, and some of those were indeed related to gender-based violence. Alarmingly, there has been an increase in femicides, and most of the deaths of women and girls have been at the hands of their intimate partners, with people locked in, locked down, and locked in with their partners. We have seen a lot of girls and young women being killed. What I wanted to really point us to in terms of our discussions today is, so with what we know about the plight of women and girls in these communities, as well as the inaccessibility of the rural communities in terms of just the distance from where most of us live in the city, but also distance for them to technology, because with unemployment, with poverty, it means that they won't have access to technology, and if they do, they won't have access to the internet. So the alternative methods that are being touted, like we are using now, they don't have access to Zoom, they don't have access to Skype, they don't have access to any other means of communicating with the rest of the world except physical face-to-face contact. So with what we know of these things, I'm trying to remove your faces from my screen. With what we know from the findings, is it possible for us to continue the work that we have been doing in these rural areas? And secondly, is it ethical? And I'll come back to that. Linked to this, Saram Swetsa, in a recent webinar in South Africa, Saram Swetsa is the CEO of the National Institute for Humanities and Social Sciences in South Africa, observed that in emergencies such as COVID-19, the political tends to obscure the personal in government and institutional responses, where, for example, the focus is on the economic, the medical, and so on and so on, and the humanitarian crisis, the personal crises that are unfolding are largely ignored. A similar trend was observed by researchers such as Julia Smith in the case of Ebola. And she referred to this as the tyranny of the urgent, where governments would focus on the immediacy of the medical challenges, and in some cases, maybe the economy, and everything else was put aside. Linked to that, there has been limited research on the gender impact, as I said, and the response has been uncoordinated.
Lebo, I'm just going to jump in if that's okay, just because we're short on the time, and yeah, I know you've got more slides, but maybe we can come back to them in the question.
I'm almost done.
Okay, okay, yeah, go for it. Yeah. Go for it, sister. Okay.
Yeah. So revisiting our lessons from the networks for change, which I've put there. What I'm asking is, or what I'm suggesting is, along the immediate pandemic responses, we shouldn't forget about the plight of the girl and the young woman in these contexts. And I want to leave you with this question. With the inaccessibility of the rural then, or the rural context, how might we ensure that girls and young women remain on the agenda for interventions? And most importantly, what are the ethics of research with girls in rural communities during the pandemic? Okay, I'll stop, Claudia.
Oh, thank you very much, Lebo. I hate, you're on a roll. I hope people will just put their questions into chat and know that there's lots more to hear from this person on this amazingly important topic. So thank you very much. We're going to move further up the continent to Ethiopia, and we're going to hear from Hannah Pugh, who is from Dalhousie University, and I'm not sure if Eleni has joined directly from Addis Ababa, but just to say that we will have either one person or two speaking from the ATSFI project, Advancing Agricultural Transformation Through Strong Vocational Education, a 6-year project that funded through Global Affairs Canada. And this project, the project director is Hannah Pugh, with whom I've worked with a great deal. And if Eleni can join us, she is the gender officer at the in-country office in Addis Ababa for ATSFI. So I think I'll turn it right into this group who they've been working on an amazing direct project interviewing female students from the colleges since COVID, and they're going to tell us about that project. So over to you, Hannah.
Hi, Claudia. Yep. Thanks for the great introduction. And yeah, as we've been working on and off with your team for the last 15 years, I think, in Ethiopia, we're really happy to be here to talk a little bit about what we're doing. I'm just going to share my screen, and hopefully that will be fine. Go. Okay, perfect. Yeah, so we wanted to talk to you about a small piece of research around the education and well-being of female agricultural students in Ethiopia through the COVID-19 pandemic. And this was carried out by myself from Dalhousie University, Eleni Nagash and Frey Wattesify from our ATSFI project office in Ethiopia, and also Madeline Nielsen, who is now a master's student in the Global Education Studies program at Queen's University. And hopefully, depending on Zoom signal, Eleni will be able to co-lead the presentation with me today. So this was a very small piece of research carried out alongside our agricultural transformation through stronger vocational education, or ATSFI project in Ethiopia. So this is a large-scale capacity development project funded through Global Affairs Canada. With many partners. We've been working on this project since 2014, and we now have a COVID-related extension, so we're likely to finish in March 2022. This project works with 4 agricultural colleges in the major regions of Ethiopia: Wareta, Maicha, Walaita Sodo, and Nedjo. So they all have students studying agricultural diploma level programs. Around 50% are female, as students are mandated by the government. They don't choose where they're studying in the agricultural sector. And the majority of these students are between 17 and 28, but for the purposes of this study, we focused on results from the 18 to the 21 age group. And yeah, just on the slide above, these were some of the students before the pandemic started, using their female-only student computer labs that were developed on campus. So the project is actually focusing on increasing the ability of the students to contribute to the labour market in Ethiopia. So we describe it a bit like an Ethiopian gym stool, one piece with 3 legs. So focusing on networking and linkages, we've got curriculum development and instructor training, and institutional transformation. So through the institutional transformation piece, Claudia's team from McGill really, it was developed a long time before the Fiat approach, but really focused on putting a huge amount of gender equity interventions at these colleges. So they all have gender mainstreaming offices with gender focal staff, and they deliver a huge range of services, small financial grants, leadership and development, working with HR policies of the colleges, providing sanitary materials to support the students. So when COVID struck in March, and the Ethiopian government's response was to close all the colleges and send the students home, we kind of were quite alarmed because the mandate was for the colleges not to have any contact with the students once they went home. So this is what kind of inspired us to do a small piece of research, as we knew that these were quite vulnerable female students. I don't think this was through lack of compassion on behalf of the colleges. As we know, when they were sent home, at least 2 of the colleges and the instructors contributed their own finances to make sure that they could go back to their families. But it was really a mandate that during the time of COVID, the colleges should work themselves. And also it was quite difficult to contact the students because, again, like Lebo was mentioning with the group she's been working with, very little internet access. Many do have cell phones, but they're generally not smartphones. So they are quite disconnected and mainly living in rural areas. So we were a little concerned about this group, and as we knew we weren't going to get the information on how these students were managing from anyone else, we decided to carry out a small piece of research through cell phone interviews to try and determine how they were facing in the pandemic and what we could do when the colleges opened to further support them. So I think if she's online, I'm going to pass over to Eleni, my colleague in Ethiopia, to talk about how we did this and what were the challenges faced in the fieldwork, and then we'll come back to me for the results. And if Eleni's not there, I'll just carry on. This is always the awkward moment. There we go.
Hear me? Yeah. Let me start. The process of the study, and the challenges we faced from these studies. Do you hear me? Please.
Yes,
Anna,
we can. Yes, we can hear you, Eleni. Yes.
Hello.
We can hear you.
Hello. Now, let me continue. Okay. And the general okay, thank you. The general process of the research study, let me introduce some of the process that we go through to this research study and the challenges they faced in the studies. The interviewed a sample of female students, traditional educations, and found in rural Ethiopia, which is supported by the ASFE project. And this research, as you know, that it's conducted has changed the daily lives and the overall well-being of the students found in 4 Tibet colleges. And the general interview facilitated by the gender focal persons, which are assigned in 4 technical colleges, in 4 rural colleges, and these facilitating this interview by their own local languages through the cell phones. And for your information, to give information, the number of students found in 4 colleges have a total of 3,090. Number 38% are female students are 2.4. The research in Dalhousie and in Ethiopia selected around 28 participants from the 80 debaters, which is supported by the ASPE project, and these interviewers who have cellular access in phones, and this is because it is the field workers and other options are limited because of the COVID-19 pandemic restrictions. And before you go through the interviews for students who are found in 4 regions, the preliminary calls are conducted to check the interests of the students and provide also verbal consents, and then we started the interview after this or after all these requirements. And in general, our interview is conducted in 4 debates. A total of 22 participants are conducted from the age of 18 to 20, and they allowed the students who have experiencing girlhood experiences and to maintain also 2 different geographical areas, and they who have diversity of experiences to keep these requirements. And also our process of selection is also allows considers to maintain in rural area and in semi-urban area. Selection criteria, after we take this all selection criteria, the actual interviews are proceeded through the phones, and these phone interviews, which lasted between 30 to 40 minutes until the questions. And after the 10 interviews were forwarded to the 4 activate colleges, to the gender focal persons who are assigned at 4 activate colleges, and they interviewed their own local languages and co-researchers. And when you talk about the essence of the interview, the essence of the interview, the essence of the interview predetermined myths of opening intended also to encourage lengthy interviews to provide detailed qualitative informations. And in this way, the interviews were prepared. And then also through this interviewing process, the researchers are consider and take attention to maintain some ethical issues. And one of the, yes.
Okay, sorry, Eleni, I think I'm just gonna pull back a second, just because we're having some signal problems and we just have a couple of minutes left. So if you don't mind, I'll just take back to just do our last couple of minutes on results. Is that okay with you?
Okay.
Perfect. And I think Eleni's example is a great example here of how challenged that we've been in Ethiopia with both internet and even cell phone signals, which are very agglomerated in Ethiopia, and how actually quite difficult it was to access a lot of these students.
Yeah, just I wanted to reflect the challenges that the researchers face during these research studies, May I continue the challenges? Some points on the challenge they face.
Yeah, I think we were just having a bit of a problem. I'm hearing
Yes.
you with the signal, Eleni. So I'll maybe just do a very quick summary of the results, and then if we have additional time, would that be okay?
In connection, yeah, on a.
Okay. So if people can see my screen, I think we've summarized here our findings from the students.
It's okay.
Is that okay? I know we've only got about 2 minutes left.
Results to.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
So our findings came out in sort of 4 thematic areas. So the students seem to be finding issues with socioeconomic consequences, also impacts on their education due to lack of resources, an increased fear of sexual and gender-based violence, and also developing mental health issues. So in the first category, I've just tried to summarize here, more of a qualitative assumption of what happened. So the majority of the students said that when they were living on campus, this freed them from the household labor they were expected to do at home, although they were still expected to do a lot of the cooking and cleaning for their male students and themselves. However, after they return to the home, most of them are faced with the responsibility for household work, which they have to balance their education against. So for a lot of these people, it was coming up to a full-time caring job. This is where we kind of got some regional diversity in findings, because our one semi-urban university in Sodo, they actually had more time. They were caring in the home, but they did have some time which they'd be able to dedicate to their education. In the 3 very rural regions, the students were really financially challenged. The cost of living had gone up, and we're actually having to work externally as well as internally in informal labor with their families to manage. So there were some quite serious challenges here. We also did mainly qualitative research, but asked a couple of qualitative questions on what they were missing and the impact of the college closures on the students. The majority said attending classes. They really wanted to continue their education, but with no internet, no interventions from the colleges, this was not possible. Other key issues were missing their friends and missing the support from their gender clubs supported through the ATSB project. So one student said, my gender club provided skills trainings like leadership, self-awareness, and assertiveness. This helps me to face challenges, and the financial support and sanitary materials from the gender office helps to continue my education. So even, I think the Ethiopian education system needs to look at this, because if we have future pandemics, if this pandemic continues, how are they going to continue their education in the homes? It does really need some intervention. Then the third theme, mental health issues. This was really of quite high concern to the interviewers. They've had such a change in their routine. They've had such increased labor. They're really feeling like they don't have any control over their lives. So these are some of the keywords I just wanted to show you that they were using to express how they were feeling. So frustration, depression, sadness, hopelessness, loss of goals, no graduation. Some are angry, some are uncomfortable, some are very sad. Some actually use the terminology, 3 or 4 use the terminology out of the 28 mental health difficulties. So we, have done a lot of research on previous pandemics and the effect that this is likely to have. And in Ethiopia, they've done considerable research that students are the group at most risk of mental health difficulties. And I think this does show that a lot of our students were having some big challenges and feeling no control over their future. This is one quote, life is getting difficult and disgusting. I can't do the things I was doing at the colleges, like reading, studying, and conversing with friends. Now I am assisting my family at home and I can't go out. And just very quickly, because I know we're short of time, increased risks of sexual and gender-based violence was one of the most problematic areas of our research. We know it's a documented issue among these students in Ethiopia. We wanted to see how it was affecting them in the homes, but we felt that we couldn't ask those questions on an interview, because they're in small homes with their family members. Would they be at increased risk? Would they feel comfortable discussing these? But actually, we found that the majority of students, 70% of students, came up with an example either of verbal harassment, of fear of sexual and gender-based violence, or also of experiences that happened to their friends or their local communities. So we really felt this was a key theme that had affected them. And our interviewers speculated that possibly because of training on the ATSB project, they felt more comfortable talking about these issues on the phone. So yeah, some of the quotes. So a lot of the girls were working in cafeterias, and often men would be coming up to them saying, oh, girls, now there's no education, you should marry me and have my children. One young student said, I know the situation is worse and I pay much attention to protecting myself from exposure of SGBV. I feel scared going to market, traveling to work, having medical appointments, and it makes me want to avoid these places. Another student kind of quite concerningly said, my parents are worried and scared about being exposed to sexual and gender-based violence. And now my mum directly pushes me to marry somebody that she would like to be her near neighbor. So our interviewers the assumption seems to be that in those rural communities, even though the young ladies are trying to get their education, the assumption is still that they're expected to marry a breadwinner and settle down. And this doesn't seem to have changed as a result of the pandemic and them going back to those houses. So I'm conscious that we're over time, so I'm going to pass back to Claudia to see what she'd like to do. And thanks for giving us the chance to talk about that.
Oh, thank you so much, Eleni and Hannah. Eleni, especially for making that effort to get here, and both of you for summarizing so succinctly the ideas, but also the findings of this work. And that's it's in its final stages of writing, I know. So watch this space. I'm going to quickly move over out of Africa and into Quebec. Our third set of presenters are from the University of Montreal, and I won't pronounce this correctly, but I'll try anyway. The Miriagon project at the University of Montreal, the McConnell University of Montreal Chair in Youth Knowledge Mobilization Group. We're going to hear from three speakers, and led by Jen Thompson, who is the postdoc, former McGill doctoral student and great researcher in Ethiopia as well. So led by Jen and Catherine Froelich, and I'll ask Jen to also introduce all three speakers. So over to you folks, and we're conscious of time. Just ask people to put questions in the chat, and we'll take it from there. So over to you, Jen and the team.
Thank you, Claudia. So hi, I'm Jen, and I'm the postdoc at University of Montreal, and I'm here with Kate Froelich in public health, also at the University of Montreal. And together we led the project that we'll be presenting today. And we're also really happy to be joined by Marianne Dupré-Deslandes, who participated in the study with us. So thanks, we're really excited to be here. I should say a lot of the ideas that we will be presenting are further developed in the article that Kate and I wrote with Sarah Fraser, Rocio Macabena Perez, and Charlotte Paquette. So we have titled our presentation with the words of a 16-year-old young woman living in Montreal who goes by EB. She said, "It's hard to stay motivated at times like these." This was the opening line of a cell film, a short video that she made on a mobile device as part of her participation in the research. And at unprecedented times like these, in the context of questions about well-being, also in the context of rainbows in windows as a symbol of hope, we sort of think that there's also a need to unsettle some of these romanticized positivity narratives and really look at the specific experiences of girls and young women. And our research is in the context of Quebec. So what do girls and young women have to say, and what kinds of messages do they want to share? We did the research in May and June. So we this is looking back, I guess, at the first wave of the pandemic. And at that time, Quebec was, and still is, quite significantly affected, relatively speaking, in the Canadian context. During May and June, we were in a period of lockdown. So all schools had closed their doors for a number of months. But there was this really a different approach to the lockdown. There were these different education system responses. Private secondary schools moved to online classes relatively quickly within a few weeks, as did post-secondary institutions. But the public secondary schools provided no formal instruction for almost 2 months. So we were doing the research in the context of this gap, this inequity in access to formal instruction, as well as during this period of lockdown. So during a period of time when everyone was being asked to stay home in self-isolation. I might pass it over to Kate now to tell us a little bit, well, to introduce our research team a little bit, as well as the pilot study that we developed together.
Thanks so much, Jen. So the project, part of the project that we're describing today is under the tutelage of the Miriagon McConnell U of M Chair on Youth Knowledge Mobilization. I am one of the co-chairs of this five-headed chair. My four other co-chairs are not with us today, but they're actively involved, and Jen is one of the postdocs as part of this project. So the project that Jen and I wrote in the spring and got funded had the following four objectives. We sought out to better understand how youth across Quebec are differentially experiencing the COVID-19 crisis. We were particularly concerned about differential social experiences based on education, health, well-being, and potential work experiences. We also wanted to explore youth agency and creativity in the face of the crisis. We set out to study youth perceptions, beliefs, and hopes for the future after the pandemic, and to develop virtual methods for doing collaborative, participatory, and visual research. We ended up with 20 youth from across Quebec, youth who came from both public and private schools, and we used a participatory visual approach that Jen will give us deep details on in just a moment.
Thanks, Kate. Oh, I just lost my screen. It's back. Thanks, Kate. So drawing on this pilot study that we developed, also observing some of the gender dynamics in the mixed groups that we facilitated, and informed by a girlhood studies lens or framework, we sort of proposed in the paper this idea of the girl in the pandemic. So we're drawing on the work of Anne Smith, the girl called The Girl in the Text, drawing on the work of Claudia, Lebo, and I think Nadine, who I saw somewhere in the participant lists, work on participatory visual methodologies, specifically as a way to engage girls and young women meaningfully in the research process in a type of girl method, as well as drawing on the work of Mary Celeste Kearney, who positions girls as media producers. So we were compelled to specifically pull out the experiences and feature the photos and cell films and co-analysis produced by the 13 girls and young women who participated in the pilot study. It's quite a diverse group of girls from a range of ages, attending different school systems at different levels, and from different social and geographic contexts. And in total, the girls produced 11 cell films and 3 photographs about their experiences. We are in a context of relatively good access to the internet and connectivity. So the way that we approached working with the girls is we first developed a playlist of instructional videos, how to make a cell film, which are, if you're interested, publicly available on the Miriagon YouTube channel. And we sent the instructional videos to all participants by email before our first group meeting. Each participant then joined 2 group sessions on Zoom that were conducted in French, and they were co-facilitated, so two facilitators, which we found to be quite helpful. In the first session, it was an introduction to photo voice and self-filming, looking at some examples, doing some brainstorming about some possible topic ideas for cell films or photos. And then participants, the girls, worked mostly individually on their own for about a week to produce either a 60-second cell film or a series of photographs. In the second Zoom session, the girls screened their work. We had some discussion and analysis. So what are the themes that girls were seeing across the work? What are some similarities and differences? Sort of a co-analysis together about what meanings girls were interpreting from the work. And we also, in both of the Zoom sessions, used the Zoom whiteboard function as a way to document some of the brainstorming and co-analysis, which was really helpful for co-generating and sharing ideas together. That's the process in a nutshell. We can talk more about that later if you like, but I think right now what I would like to do is turn it over to Marianne, who is here somewhere. I'd like to turn it over to Marianne to introduce the self-film that she made and to tell us a little bit about her experience participating in the research. Marianne, are you there?
Yes, I'm there.
Okay. Hi,
So,
welcome. Nice to see you.
Yeah, I'm happy. So hi, everybody. As you know, my name is Marianne, and right now I am currently studying at UQAM in Montreal. So right now I'm going to present you my self-film, The Uncertainty of the Pandemic. As you're going to see, it's in French, but they're subtitled in English because my first language is French. So I hope you like it.
Okay, so I'll play it.
École fermée, entreprise fermée, rassemblement interdit. Qui aurait cru qu'une situation pareille nous arriverait? J'ai toujours été une personne qui avait un horaire bien chargé et j'adorais cela. Du jour au lendemain, comme d'un simple geste de la main, plus rien. Plus de pratique ou de tournois de soccer. Plus d'hébergement de groupe à mon travail. Plus de pratique ou de game de frisbee. Et surtout, plus aucun temps pour voir mes amis ou simplement avoir des contacts sociaux avec des personnes autres que ma famille. De l'incertitude par rapport à l'avenir et du stress m'ont envahi. Je me devais d'agir pour essayer d'occuper mes journées. Je me suis mise à l'action. Entraînement, vélo et course. Des jeux de société à la tonne. La fameuse tradition de samedi soir, des feux et des guillemets. De la cuisine. Et des marches avec les amis. J'ai eu des bonnes journées comme des mauvaises. Pour une fois, je ne choisissais plus ce qui se passait dans mon quotidien. Le gouvernement décidait de la suite des choses pour plusieurs sphères de ma vie. Je ne sais pas ce qui m'attend demain ou après-demain. L'incertitude m'envahit et j'ai bien hâte qu'elle disparaisse, ou du moins qu'elle s'estompe.
So yeah, that was my self-film I did last April, I think, or last May. In that self-film, I wanted to show a lot of things. First of all, I wanted to show that it was really a fast transition between having liberty to having no liberty, because we couldn't like go out, see friends, do sports, do social activities. So it was really difficult for that. And personally, I was really a busy girl before the pandemic because I had a lot of social activities, a lot of sports, a lot of practice, and it passed to having a busy schedule to having nothing to do except school, but like in Zoom. So it was really, really difficult for me. I love to be really busy in the day, but right now I was really like alone with my family, and I had to stay at home and had less things to do over there. I wanted to show too that there were some good and bad days. So some good days I wanted to do activities. So I did walking, I did running, but some other days was really difficult, really mentally, because I didn't want to, it was really difficult for me because I had to stay like more at home and I like to go out a lot. So it was really difficult for my mental health. And I wanted to show too that I really like to prepare my future to see what will happen next day. But right now I couldn't decide what will happen in my future because the government decided for me. So it didn't help for my anxiety. So it really increased it a lot. So that was difficult parts. And to finish, I want to tell that this research was really, really important for me. I was really happy to do it because it was really difficult to tell with words what I was thinking about this pandemic and what I was feeling inside of me. And I didn't want to overwhelm my family with all the problems I had because they had some too, and it was really difficult for them too. So I kept it a lot inside of me, and that's why my mental health was affected. So this video helped me, and these meetings helped me to talk with other people about what I was feeling and about how they were feeling. So I was like happy because I wasn't alone in all of that, and I wasn't alone in what I was feeling. So yeah, it was really helpful for me. It did pass my time during the pandemic, and it was really helpful for my health to like put words on what I was feeling, like I told before. And it really helped me to reduce my anxiety, because I could see that other people, what were their solution, what they would do against all the problems we had during this pandemic. So thank you so much for listening to me. I'm really happy to present to you today.
Thanks, Marianne. I think, Claudia, do I have another few minutes? I know we're sort of getting close to the end. Like, I have a few more slides.
I can give you 30 seconds.
Oh,
Okay.
30 seconds.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Then I'm not going to show the other slides. I think what I'll say is that a couple of key messages. One, we found that school was really played a structuring role for a lot of the girls, and without having school, there was this tension between sort of not being sure what to do, feeling unmotivated, dealing with the isolation. But then also on the other hand, this destructuring and the way that in destructuring their time, a lot of girls had time for themselves, time for self-care, a break from school. Girls had a lot to say about school, but one of the key findings was that in this time that girls had, a lot of girls discovered new interests. They tried new activities. They engaged in creative activities like cooking and sewing and physical activity and gaming and playing sports, music as a way to be well. Things that they said that they wouldn't have been doing when they normally had school. The strength of girls' political voices was really important. Girls engaged with the media. They spoke back to either positive media, like overly positive media representations, or what they found overly negative. So there was this sort of speaking back to the media as a way to try to represent the multifaceted and complex, like Marianne said, good days and bad days. It's a bit of both, to really nuance the representations that they were seeing in the media. And then lastly, as Marianne sort of mentioned, another one of the key finding was really just how much the girls appreciated participating in the research, and how it provided an opportunity to connect and to reframe what they were experiencing during lockdown as a way to articulate the moment and as a way to notice the moment. So just this idea that creative research about the pandemic, during the pandemic, offers a type of intervention. And I'll stop there. Oh, wait, I should show can I show the last slide, because it has our acknowledgements. Yes. So this is the article, and then we would like to say that the research was supported by Myriagon, CRESP, and the University of Montreal. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was so lovely, Marianne, to have you join our group on the Girl in the Pandemic would not be the Girl in the Pandemic without joining with someone right in the direct participation. So thank you very much. We are out of time. I'm going to do something really, I know that people have to leave, but if people would like to stay, but I'm going to add, there are many comments and questions in the chat box, but I'm going to throw out one for everybody that's just like a 1-minuter that could elicit probably thousands of hours. But one of the questions was, what's this got to do with policy, or how could policy help this, or how does this inform policy? So certainly in terms of the Institute for Health and Social Policy, I'm just going to throw that question out. I know people are leaving, they'll leave, but I'm hoping that people can stay on for a few minutes anyway. So here's the question. What's policy got to do with it, or how does this inform policy? Lebo, do you want to go first? Or do you want to run to bed? How have you gone to bed?
No, I'm
okay.
I'm still here.
Yeah, sorry.
What is the question?
What's policy got to do with it, or how could policy how could this work inform policy, or what would you like policymakers to do? Anything.
I guess having listened to the other two presentations for the South African context and similar contexts in particular, I would just like the policymakers not to forget the rural context. it seemed to me, as usual, like the policies that have been made so far and the interventions assumed a very urban, largely township, if they were considering poorly resourced areas, but largely ignoring what has been happening in the rural areas. So I would say to policymakers, remember there is a large rural population in South Africa.
Thanks, Lebo. Hannah and Eleni, over to you.
So I think we would say to really focus on changing some of those educational policies in Ethiopia. We know that people wanted to support students to continue their education, but when the policies are written one way, they're going to struggle to do that. Also, as Lebo said, with the rural-urban divide, we know in Ethiopia that they've been continuing education for higher level university students in urban areas, and also some younger students also in urban areas through the medium of television, which isn't going to help those people in the rural areas. So we'd really hope that policies in Ethiopia around education could become more flexible so that there is a precedent for, and also budget and resources for contacting students in their homes and for supporting them to kind of continue education and related supports in these times.
Great, thank you. I know we had a representative from Global Affairs Canada on earlier, so maybe she's still listening too. Okay, and Jen, Marianne, and Catherine. I don't know which one of you would like to jump in here, or if you have a pre-recorded message. Okay.
I could jump in. This is actually a question that we asked the girls in the focus groups. We said, well, if you had a message for decision makers, what would it be? And a lot of the girls talked about sort of feeling forgotten, in particular the girls in public secondary schools, just feeling forgotten by the Ministry of Education, by different levels of government. So I think that one of the messages that girls, Marianne, and you can correct me here, but one of the message was that girls have a lot to say and want to be heard, so that, you know, policy needs to ask and listen to girls.
Wonderful, thank you very much. I'm going to unofficially end this for those people who were signed in for 12:30 to 1:30 Montreal time. So thank you everyone for coming and for your wonderful attention to this and the great questions in the chat box and your great comments. But I'm going to invite anyone who'd like to stay on for 10 minutes to interact. I hope all speakers can stay on. We didn't discuss this ahead of time, but we'll stay on for 10 minutes or so, and if people, we could just continue talking. Is that okay, Jen?
That's absolutely fine. And just thank you everyone for coming to this talk, and you'll see in the chat a link to all of the upcoming talks will be there, and thank you to all the speakers. But yes, please continue.
Okay, thank you.
Keep going.
All right. That's going. Okay, so we'll just open, maybe just open it up with the mics if people are on, rather than trying to take questions here. So if anyone would like to just raise their hand, or maybe, I'm not sure if I can see everybody. Rami, can you see everybody? Okay.
Yes.
Okay, does anyone have a question? Or any of the speakers want to ask any questions of each other? Great.
So I think we have a question from McGill, Coman.
Okay, over to you, McGill.
The invitation. I'm from Israel, and I just wanted to make a comment. I worked many years as a researcher and a practitioner with adolescent girls and young women, and I think that what the pandemic did, or the influence, is that it's very, like you said, I take the phrase, the tyranny of the urgent, because what the situation is that urgency made politicians accept traditional policies, like girls should not go to school. And I can say that in Israel at the moment there is a kind of negotiation if ultra-Orthodox boys will go back to school, leaving the girls at home because it's more important that girls will go to school. So I think that maybe the policy recommendation that we should stress out very firmly is that we should not go back to tradition and keep our normal girls situation go on.
Oh, that's lovely. So wonderful. It's a wonderful, I'll take it as a comment. I don't know if anybody would like to respond to it or just put their hands up or cheer. Is there anyone else who has a question right now? Otherwise, yeah. Are there other questions or comments, Rami? Well, what do you think of that, Jen, Thompson, Hannah, and Lebo, or Catherine, or Marianne, on not going back to tradition, get rid of tradition, or move on?
It's not get rid of tradition.
Not get rid of, yeah, right.
I'm not naive,
no,
but I think that we should.
Yeah, I am.
We should think about the tools that can serve us in keeping at least the achievement that we had in the last 10 years and not go back, forget all the feminist achievements.
Yes, right. Anyone?
I think for us, just very quickly, for us, the pandemic really did exacerbate those rural and semi-urban or rural and urban differences because, you know, the students were at colleges, they had a certain amount of freedom. And then as soon as they go back into the homes, they're facing comments from their family and from the public like, oh, education's gone now, you need to just get down and marry a breadwinner. And they're getting those traditional comments, more pre-feminism, that they had really escaped from a certain extent, not completely, at the colleges. So just for us, that really did, you know, they're just back there for 6 or 9 months or a year, but it's really, I think, set back and really perhaps given people excuses as to why their new outlook in their education, you know, isn't sustainable, or, you know, they should be thinking perhaps back to the way other people would like them to think. So it did really exacerbate those differences for us.
University of Montreal, anyone want to comment?
I have a question.
Oh, okay, sure. Okay, we'll take a question and okay. Yes, I'll recognize.
Sorry, did I interrupt?
No, it's okay. Go ahead.
Okay, I have a question from Jen and team. Thank you so much for the great presentation. The last piece that you mentioned, it was the girls want policymakers to pay attention to them. So I was curious to know a little more about what types of action, or what are the, you know, what types of actions girls request from policymakers. Would you please elaborate more on that? Thank you.
Jen, do you want to respond to that first?
Do you want to jump in?
Sure. I just
jump in.
Don't want to steal your thunder. So just jump in whenever, Jen. You know, the girls and youth overall were incredibly eloquent about the fact that they had a lot to say. They had a lot to say. They were directly involved in what was happening because they were excluded from society overall, especially the school situation. And what they were saying is that our particular age group is not one that's given much listening to. Our concerns are not considered valid. We're considered immature, and we actually have really clear ideas about what we need. And so it was really about having a forum. That's my take from it. Jennifer, do you want to add to that?
No, that sounds great.
So, you know, concretely, Jen, I don't know if there are any concrete responses for Hani. It was really more about having a forum to be heard.
Thank you.
I think we have a question from Katie McCanty.
Okay, Katie, over to you.
Not surprisingly, for those of you who know me, I have a question about technology and cell phones. I was really interested to hear about the obviously the use of self-filming, but cell phones in general in accessing the rural populations that folks were talking to, and also the challenges that has that posed to the research, but also to the participants, for example, access to education. And I'm just sort of trying to think through what that means for researchers, for what we're advocating in terms of policy change, because I think these things, maybe the panel can answer it either way that they feel, speak to them most, but I'm kind of, part of me wants to go, okay, well then, we should make sure girls have more access to cell phones, for example. But then another part of me is saying, why are we so stuck on cell phones? When is it not appropriate to use cell phones? And should we be advocating for, listen, we need to develop ways to have, for example, in-person interviews or educational moments that are safe, physically as well, obviously following protocol that is accessible. So I'd be interested to hear the panel's responses to that. And obviously I've just presented 2 options, but I'm sure there are other ones. So yeah, I'd love to hear what folks have to say about that.
Okay. Lebo, do you want to jump in?
Don't tell Anne I said on the one hand.
Okay, I won't. It's okay.
But on the one hand, Katie, I guess we could say, let's give girls cell phones so that we can access them easily. But then that should be followed by let's also give them access to the internet, right? At the same time, girls in rural areas and their families are dealing with much, much more than just access to technology. I'm still struggling with my own conscience on whether it is ethical for me to pick up the phone and say to a girl who's struggling with no access to food, no access to healthcare, no access to transport to go anywhere, and say to her, do you have 30 minutes for an interview? Even if I were to send her data for the internet. So it's something that I'm still struggling with, and I would appreciate maybe somebody to mediate it for me and to make me see the importance of keeping contact going.
Okay.
Sorry, that wasn't satisfactory, I know, but that's where I am with the issue.
Hannah, you and Eleni and your group use cell phones to conduct interviews. So, and I know you had some concerns and you raised some of those, but do you want to jump in on Katie's question?
Yeah, I'm not sure I have a categoric answer either, because our assumptions about the use of cell phones, I think, was slightly wrong, because we didn't have an option, because the girls don't have internet access and they don't have smartphones, they just have the basic cell phones. So we really didn't have an option for how to discuss with them apart from the cell phones. But we assumed that they would not be very willing to discuss their feelings, to discuss sexual gender-based violence over that medium, when actually they were a lot more forthcoming than we had anticipated. So it kind of led me to kind of question, the kind of relationships and discussions that you can have over that medium. I would say it's really the finances that are holding. We actually even had to fund our interviewers to be able to make those calls to the students. So I think in Ethiopia, yeah, the context is in the rural areas is so challenging in that having the finances even to use those devices and to make them sustainable and to provide the internet is really, I think, what some of these girls may need. But really, what's the most sustainable method of doing that? Is it cell phones? Is it something else? I'd love someone to have all the answers to those questions.
And the University of Montreal.
Thanks. Thanks, Katie. I don't know if I have a great answer either. I mean, I know that access to technology when we were entering sort of conscious access to technology, the youth and the girls who were joining the study, we didn't know. And so we sort of did it in a way that we adapted. So different participants in different areas participated in different ways by sending videos or by sending photos through Facebook Messenger chat or by text message. Like, we sort of adapted based on recognizing that in different contexts, the girls had different access to technologies. We sort of, I think, responded to the moment rather than acted proactively, recognizing that it just happened very quickly and we were sort of in it. I don't know, Kate, if you have, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I wouldn't mind just jumping in on this. It's a very different context, obviously, from South Africa or Ethiopia, but one thing that really struck us, and Marianne spoke to it poignantly today, is how much the girls deeply appreciated the process. They really felt, and we asked a lot of them, so there were numerous meetings with us. There was the whole creation of the self-film or the photo voice. And it gave them a project to in order to voice what they were experiencing, and many of them felt that this in itself was an important experience. So whether it was through the technology or not, in a way, is almost moot, even though the technology obviously was so key for the self-filmmaking. So yeah, go ahead.
I would also just say, the ethics of doing this work or not doing this work was on our mind as we were reaching out, and we had a hard time recruiting or finding youth, but we eventually had 13 girls. But sort of coming back to Lebo's comment about this tension, the ethics of really seeking engagement of girls and young women in this conversation, and how do we do this in a way that's ethical and the sort of imperative to ask, but at the same time not wanting to ask too much, and conscious that for some girls maybe doing online classes, their days are packed with Zoom calls. They don't want another Zoom call, and sort of trying to find this balance between engagement and asking, but not asking too much, and really trying to listen to the feedback that we were getting. Yeah, that was just the ethics of asking too little or too much.
Thank you. Maybe I'll just put in a plug. There's a new book coming out called The Ethics of Working with Girls in Participatory Visual Methodologies, Transnational Perspectives. The lead editor is Relebohile Moletsane, but I think Katie has a chapter in there, and Jen, I think you have a chapter in there. So I think you'll already have to plan a sequel because it was sent to press before March the 12th. So there's definitely part 2 of that book coming out too. One last question or one last point. Rami, do we have another question, or does somebody want to jump in?
There's a question in the chat that someone has asked because their internet is no good.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's mine. I'm sorry because it's kicking.
Okay. Oh, I see. There it is. My internet is not good, but I'd like to ask if there's some creative solutions this panelists may think of to help the interaction of the girls, taking into consideration all the challenges we've just heard. So I know we've had a lot of creative solutions here already. Are there any one last go at creative solutions here in terms of assisting or supporting the interaction of girls? Jen and Catherine, do you want to say anything? Or Marianne? Or you're all done? Hannah, do you have something to say?
Must keep girls connected by all means. Create groups by technology, Zoom, WhatsApp, whatever. But I think this is the basis to keep them feel whatever, but connected and support each other. And I think it's very, very important and very simple.
Thank you, McGill. That's very good. Lebo, do you want to throw in anything? I know you've been doing some amazing work with groups, mothers groups in South Africa and girls and young women. Do you want to throw that in, Lebo?
No, not right now. Sorry.
Okay, alrighty. There's another webinar from Sweden last week where Lebo talked about it. So if Katya is still on the line.
You mean where I was talking about initiatives by individuals and communities?
Yeah.
So as everybody knows, South Africa has struggled with gender-based violence, and with COVID, as I said in the presentation, the rates went sky high. And government has always been inept in addressing it, except for the rhetoric that goes on and on and on. So communities had to rely on themselves, and members had to rely on each other. So for example, because of lockdown and not having access to each other, groups of women would find creative ways of communicating with each other. I don't know whether you know about Tupperware, the plastic, the expensive plastic dishes that South Africans so love, that you order from somebody or online. So if I have in my network Claudia, then I would SMS Claudia, text Claudia and say, Claudia, come and collect your order of Tupperware or your order of cosmetics. And that is a code for Claudia to know that my husband is busy beating me up or about to kill me. So Claudia would ask for help. So using code language or codes to alert each other when we are in trouble in our homes.
Yeah, thank you. I knew you would come through on a creative solution, or the ways in which interaction becomes the creative solution and how to do that. So thank you very much. Hannah, do you want to jump in on anything, or are we fine on this?
No, I think we're good. We again would love to have the option to use more creative solutions in this context, but for us it was very limited to the calls. So networks among students would have participated in visual methodologies would have been amazing, but we were really struggling to do that in this survey.
I think that was great. Well, I think we have done a wonderful job of extending our wonderful webinar, and thank you so much for the speakers of Lebo and Eleni and Hannah and Marianne and Catherine and Jen all staying on long past the time that I said you would be staying on. So thank you. I owe you a half an hour of your life. And thanks to all the people who've stayed on to just ask questions and to add more comments. This has been an amazing session, and I just think, what can we do next? How do we keep going on this work? How do we make sure that we do good and do lots of good and not harm, and to really get through these next months together with the girl and for the girl and about the girl in the pandemic. So I thank everyone. We're going to log down or chow down here. Thank you very much. And as Jen Proudfoot and Anake said, there's another talk coming up in the near future, and I'm sure that we're going to be following up in other Girl in the Pandemic talks as well. So good night, Lebo and Eleni. Good day to everyone else, and all the best. Take care. Stay safe. Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.
To have met you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Anake. That was wonderful. You're the best.
I did nothing. I hate it to end. This is like, I feel like the discussion needs to keep going, but hearing from you that there's going to be a numero dos makes me very happy.
Oh, there's going to be more. Yes, absolutely.
Excellent.
Thank you, Rami, so much. Thank you, Jen.
All right, here we go.